happen. I'd like to introduce myself and the women that are in the room with me today. My name is Susan May. I am a member of the board of Idaho Women's Charitable Foundation and a former grants chair. I have Amy Duquet in the room. Amy is the current grants chair of Idaho Women's Charitable Foundation. We have Susan Gibson here. Susan has been leading up the Above and Beyond Grant Committee for the last 6 months, and we appreciate all the work that she's done. And we also have Mary Hinson here, and Mary is going to be taking the reins from Susan probably almost as soon as this webinar is over and our meeting in Nampa is over, and she will be managing the committee and leading the committee for the Above and Beyond grant going forward. As Evan said, you have we'll be walking through a PowerPoint slides, although I'll be providing you more information than what's on the slides. So if you have something to take notes on, that would be great. We're going to do this in two different ways. First of all, I'm going to talk through the slide deck first. That's the basic information about Idaho Women's Charitable Foundation as an organization, if you are not familiar with us, and that's very foundational for us that you understand that, so you then will better understand our grants process. The second half of the slide deck deals with the grants process, our criteria, how everything works. The handout that you've been sent, I will address at the end of the slide deck because that's a little bit more detailed information of things that will be helpful to you if you decide that you want to apply for a grant with us, which we hope that you do decide that. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of stop for questions halfway through the deck. There's sort of a good place to stop, and then we can do some questions then, and we will finish, I hope, well before the hour. We've scheduled for 90 minutes, but I think we'd like to have a fair amount of time for questions from the group, so that if there are things that come up that I'm not clear on or not specific, please feel free to ask for clarity or more information about it, those types of things. So let's get started. The first thing we have in the grants, am I going right? Okay. Is our mission for IWCF, which is a basic foundational piece. And this is the only slide I'm going to read to you just because it's important. I think the words are very important to us and very important for you to understand, so you understand the grants process. Idaho Women's Charitable Foundation fosters educated philanthropy through collaboration, pooled resources, and the individual giving to positively impact the community. The key words that we've bolded, they're not bolded in the mission, but they're bolded for this session, is this concept of educated philanthropy, which is one of the reasons why we're here today talking to you. First of all, we spend, when I first joined the organization, I think there were 4 or 5 education sessions around grants. We have nearly doubled that in the last 4 years. Mainly because we get lots of questions about our process. We want to make sure that the nonprofit world out there is educated about what we do and how we do it, which helps us in getting stronger grants, and it also helps you in having a better chance of receiving a grant from us. And then secondarily, as we talk through some of the things today, I hope the education for you becomes not just about the grants process with IWCF, but a few tips along the way about how you might write better grants in general. We have a pretty rigorous process, and a lot of folks have come back to us in the past and said, boy, if you can get a grant from IWCF, you have a really great chance of getting a grant from others, because you learn a lot through our process about what people are looking for. To start with a little bit about who we are, which I think, again, is important. We currently have around 376 women who are part of our organization, and that number flexes every year. We generally add more women than we lose, but our goal for this coming year is between 400 and 450, and that's not an unrealistic goal for us. Each woman contributes $1,100 to the pool. And what that $1,100 is used for is $100 of it goes to administration. We actually have 2 part-time people who work for the organization, but other than that, we are a fully volunteer organization. Everybody sitting in the room with me today, including myself, are all volunteers. And our grants process is only as good as it is because of the kind of women that are members and the time and effort that they give to the process. $500 of the $1,100 goes to pooled fund grants. And we're going to talk a little bit about pooled fund and how that works today. And then $500 of that is individual giving. And what that means is that we are able, each person as a member, to designate to any 501c3 organization, government organization, or religious organization, we are able to designate our own personal contribution of $500. And so what does that mean to you who are sitting on the other side thinking about getting a grant? First of all, the grants that you would be applying for that we're going to talk about today come from that first $500, which is pooled fund grants. But generally, we have between 50 and 60 women involved in our grants process every year. And then our membership, which is the 376 women, gets to see the majority of those folks who have applied for grants. So many times you may get one of the $500 coming to your organization because you've been part of this process, and somebody who's a member has learned about you, learned what you do, been interested in sort of being a contributor. So there's a lot of benefits from a visibility standpoint and people learning about the organizations that come to the table and send applications to us. Annually, we do 5 different grants that are between $20,000 and $30,000. And this is what we call our annual pooled funds grant process. You can request a grant from us between the $20,000 and $30,000 mark, and it can be funded over a 1 or 2 year time period. The 5 different interest areas that we fund in are cultural arts, the environment, education, financial stability, and health. And when we get to talking a little bit about the handout that you have, you will see on that handout what are the definitions of each one of those interest areas. Each organization who applies through the annual process has the ability and the opportunity to select in which category they would like to seek funding. We're going to say this a couple of times because this has come up quite frequently in the last couple of years, that we must, when you request a grant from us, the dollars that you request must be spent in the year that they are received. And we're going to talk a little bit later about why that's important to us as an organization. We're not here today to primarily talk about this process, but anybody who hears about the Above and Beyond grant today, which is a higher number, a higher dollar number, also has the opportunity, if that grant is not what you think is appropriate to what you need, you also will have an opportunity to apply in the annual grants process. So I guess what we're saying is we have 2 options that we're going to speak to today, even though we're going to spend the primary time on the Above and Beyond grant. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the Above and Beyond grant, which is an extra grant over and above the 5 interest area grants that we will be awarding in 2019. This grant is much larger in size. The range for this grant request is between $50,000 and $60,000. Again, can be funded over 1 or 2 years, whatever is the need of the organization and the request. And this grant is a unique grant because it is going to, this grant, we've done one of these previously. Every year that we do this, we say it's a unique grant, so it's not certain whether we will continue to go in this direction, but we proactively target sort of a specific community need, and this year we're targeting a specific demographic. And where do we get this money? Many times the pooled fund grants are not completely spent every year. And so we put a little aside. And so the $50,000 to $60,000 that we have for this year has been money that we have saved over the last couple of years from the pooled fund grants process. It's important for you to know that once we take in money for pooled fund grants, It doesn't go ever for anything else but pooled fund grants. So if we have extra, we've committed as an organization that that money will always go back out into the community in some form. We're going to talk about some of our criteria in a little bit later, but we have here that this grant also may fund a smaller part of a larger project, which in the annual grants process of the 5 interest areas, we generally would like to be a bigger portion and percentage of those projects than we would in this one. And then a couple of things to talk about how we approach grants. I've already mentioned this concept of education. And again, I'm going to talk about it again because it is so very important to us. Our goal really with our mission and our organization is to create a group of women who are educated philanthropists. And many times we hope they stay with us for years, but if they leave the organization or they move to another city and they don't want to belong any longer, we feel really good that we are sending another educated philanthropist out into the world or out into another community to be able to do good work. We use that education in our grants process in that we spend a lot of time talking and reviewing the specific information about each request and each organization that applies with us. So we will look up the organization online. We will do a significant amount of research from maybe others who have had contact or interactions with the organization. And when you see our application, you will begin to understand why we ask for the kinds of information that we do, because it gives us an overall picture of the stability of the organization, what the grant request is, and how the money is going to be spent. Collaboration comes in a couple of different ways. First of all, we feel that these education sessions are a way for us to collaborate with the communities that we serve, to learn more and more and more every year about the kinds of organizations that are in those communities and to help educate you about us. And second of all, as is different from some foundations or some organizations, our members make the decision about who gets the grants. As I mentioned, we have members, usually 50 to 60, working on individualized committees. There is a committee for each one of the 5 interest areas, and there will be a committee for the Above and Beyond grant this year. That committee will make a decision as a group whether or not the grants that they receive and they look at will go forward in the process. Once we have got a group of grants that are going to the ballot, and we're going to talk about our process in a few minutes, that ballot will go out to all 376 members. And we are a democracy. And we prove that over and over again with the concept that everyone pays the same amount of money. So everybody gets one vote, and whoever wins on that ballot is the organization and the grant request that we fund for that year. So again, the collaboration is internally, but it's also externally in terms of how we think about it. Okay, before I go to how the process works and what our criteria is, I'm going to stop here and just check in with you to say, does anyone have any questions about IWCF, the organization, how it works, and anything that I've shared with you thus far?
And again, feel free to type it into the questions bar and we can read it out loud.
Please don't make this so easy on me. Okay, well then let's move on. The next slide speaks to what our criteria is. What are the things that we really want to fund? And again, we want you to think very carefully when you apply for a grant with us about what it is that you really need as an organization and what critical need that will fill or address or help to eliminate that need in your particular community or with your particular demographic that you're trying to serve. We only address critical needs in southwestern Idaho, And when we get to the handout, you will see that we list the list of counties that we serve. The reason we only serve a certain number of counties in the Southwest is that there are other pooled fund giving groups in other parts of Idaho that are part of a group of nationally, a group of called the Women's Collective Giving Network, which is WCGN. And between the three groups that have a presence in Idaho, we serve the entire state. But IWCF serves just the counties that you'll see on the handout. We also, one of our criteria is that we're really looking for some different, creative, innovative way in which you want to address whatever the need is or the challenges that you're trying to overcome. And the reason for that is there are many issues and problems that we have in each one of our communities, and many of them have been there for years and years and years. And sometimes we feel like, gosh, we're never making progress on that issue or this issue. And so one of the criteria that we've built into our process is, how are you looking at this ongoing need that has maybe been there for a long time, or maybe it's an emerging need, but how are you looking at this in a different way? And why is the way that you're looking at it going to be the thing that makes the bigger impact on fixing or addressing that need? And then the other piece is we look for sustainability of the grant request. And I've learned over the course of time being part of this organization and being involved in the community myself, the way that you address sustainability many times is that you go out and you find money from someone else. But what we'd like to know is, do you have a plan of how you're going to do that? And will that be something that is reasonable and something that your organization will be able to do? And that will be one of the things that you will see as part of the criteria on the application as well. In the Above and Beyond grant, so that slide we just looked at, which is what we seek to fund, is an overarching umbrella slide that says in all the grants we do, the 5 interest areas and the Above and Beyond grant, that criteria is important. In the Above and Beyond grant, we have some other specificity that is related to only that grant, which is the $50,000 to $60,000 grant again, which I think is one of the reasons why many of you are here. Okay, we have some additional criteria that goes with that process this year. This year, the targeted areas, so if you remember when we talked about Above and Beyond, which we actually call AB, so if you hear me saying AB because it's a little bit easier and it's a little bit less unwieldy, the AB grant is going to fund towns and unincorporated areas with populations under 30,000.
We do have a question about that. How many organizations will be awarded the AB grant?
One.
One.
Yes. So in each one of the grant categories that we have, the 5 interest areas, 1 grant in each, and the Above and Beyond grant will be 1 grant. Again, the 5 interest areas, minimum of 20 to maximum of 30,000, Above and Beyond, minimum of 50 to maximum of 60. If you only need 40, you're going to have to sort of say, we need to figure out where we need to use $10,000, or we're going to try to get a $30,000 and get the $10,000 from somewhere else. I'm using that as an example to sort of make sure that there's an understanding about the minimums and maximums. So we were saying that populations under $30,000 and addressing 1 of 4 areas or 2 of 4 areas or 3 or 4 areas, if you have a grant that addresses each one of these or all of them: infrastructure, healthcare, and that means including mental health, education, or services for seniors, and services for seniors. It can be an or an and, depending on what the request is that you submit. We also want folks to know that organizations who may be in urban areas, so there may be an organization in Boise, or there may be an organization in Nampa that addresses a need in urban areas, but also may address a need in a city or an urban area that's more than $30,000, can apply, but the grant request must go to, okay, an urban area with a population, a rural area with a population under 30,000 people. Sorry about that. So, you know, we're really sort of trying to target rural areas, and these 4 areas within the rural area, populations under 30,000 this year with this grant. Rural areas, I will also say, can also apply for a grant in one of the 5 interest areas. So again, we have had a number of grants over the 17, are we 17 now? I think we just had our 17th anniversary. In the 17 years that we've been an organization, we have funded a number of rural areas. This year, because we have the sort of size of money that we have, we thought rural areas would be a good specific area for us to target. Now, there are a number of things that we do not fund. And if there was any list that I would say to you, please, please, please pay attention to this list. Please, please, please pay attention to this list. Because if you come in with a request that seeks to do one of these things that are listed on this list, your grant request will be automatically declined. We do not fund these particular bullets. And I'm going to go through them because they're really important. But first, I'm going to say to you and explain to you why we have this sort of do not fund category and why we have the criteria we do. First of all, the 60 women who work on the grants committee are in essence making decisions to how to use the money of 376 women. So we are very conscious about having a methodical process which we communicate to all members, and then sticking to that process, because if you're the grants chair or if you're leading up a committee like Susan has done and Amy has done and Mary has done and I have done, we end up making decisions about other people's money. And so we take our responsibility in leading up those committees and being members of those committees very seriously. We also, as an organization, want to know exactly where our money is going. And that is very important to us, that when we give a grant, that we know where it's going, and we have a pretty good assessment process after the grants are awarded in terms of follow-up to make sure that the money and the decision that we've made for all these 376 women who put their money into this pool is going to the place we said it was going to go to. And then last but not least, because we have these annual dues and we have this annual money coming in, it is really, really important to us that our money get into the community as quickly as possible and start doing things within the community. So when you talk about things like annual funds, we don't fund those. We don't fund endowments. We don't fund scholarship funds, because those particular types of funds are not always immediately released to the community to get work done really quickly. And they are also areas in which you don't always necessarily know where the money is going to go. They may be, an annual fund may be a large capital campaign that is going to fund a lot of different things. An endowment may be something where it's held for years before it ever gets back out into the community. And scholarship funds normally are awarded to individual people who get them, and then we don't know who those people are. And so again, that's part of the reasons why the first 2 are on the list. Fundraising, we do not fund fundraising events. And the reason for that is we are the fundraising. We are the money that we want you to take and do something with it that we can see a serious impact to the community. And we expect that fundraising events might be part of your sustainability for going forward, but we do not want to be the folks that fund those. General operating funds or ongoing operations, again, can be very sort of gray around what the money is being used for. If in fact we have some operating funds that are related to a specific program or a specific project or a specific issue that is connected to the overall impact of the grant, we do consider operating funds for those, but we don't do just a general operations grant. Individuals, again, that goes a little bit back to the scholarship program, but also we're looking for our money and our dollars to go into a community and have a greater impact on larger numbers of people than just one person. Incomplete applications, we have been around and around about these kinds of things for the last couple of years. We actually, for the 5 pooled fund grants, and I don't know what the answer might be for the AB grant this year, we actually, in most years, receive between 80 and 120 applications for the 5 pooled fund grants. We have no ability as an all volunteer organization to come back and ask for additional information that's missing from the application. So we have recently added this to our do not fund list, saying, please, 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 when you fill out the application, have someone else look at it, double check, triple check, make sure you filled in all the blanks and given us all the information. Because if it comes in without something, if it comes in without an attachment, it will not go forward in the process. Requests designed to influence government officials and lobbying. I guess we could say that's kind of a no-brainer, but I don't know that it really is. You know, what the women of this organization want to be is we want to be above the fray of politics. And so we have really made a concerted effort to fund good critical needs in communities and not try to stay away from anything that has a political bent to it. Requests that require participation or membership in any faith-based organizations. Again, we will fund churches. We have funded religious organizations, but if there is a requirement with that grant that the people who are served or the people who are receiving the grant must become a member of that organization or must be a participant in that organization, we will not fund that particular grant. We want to fund something that's gives people the individual choice. And then the whole concept of undesignated capital campaign contributions. And I will also say to you, we have received requests for capital campaign contributions where they've said this is going to be for this particular aspect of the capital campaign. If we can be assured that that money will be spent in the year in which it is given to you. So it will be spent in the 2 years, up to 2 years that you have once you receive the grant, we will consider it. But we are a little bit sort of wary of capital campaigns because many times that is money that is, it's very important to organizations. We think having capital campaigns is important. But when we think about what our mission is, which is to get money into the community quickly, many times that capital campaign may go on for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and we would like to fund something where our money is going to be used sooner than that. Okay, let me stop there and see if there are any questions, because that was a lot of information about what we do fund and what we don't fund. Any questions from the group on that?
Can the AB grant serve multiple rural towns or in your service area or just one?
Can serve multiple if the grant is designed that way, or just one, either way.
We have a question of, can you pay a staff person?
I would say yes, depending on what the nature of that person is going to be doing as it relates to the grant. So if it's, we need an I'm going to use an example. We need an executive director and we need to have this person because we need it as an organization. That would probably fall more in the category of ongoing operations. But if in fact, and I'll use an example of something that we've had in the past, we are starting a program of training the trainers on, it was a specific mental health issue in the schools. And this program, we need to hire a person to do this program. This program will be training people who will train people. That was an example of a staff person that we readily funded, because first of all, part of the sustainability was the person's going to teach others to teach others to teach others. So there was a way that the program may go on without the person, but we committed to that program and therefore funded that person as a staff person. And that's very different than somebody who's just needed to be part of the general operations of the organization on an ongoing basis.
Makes sense. A couple other questions, one from Jessica. Does capacity to support project implementation count at general funding?
In other words, are you, so let me ask back, and Jessica, if you could come back to, so are you asking whether or not that's a criteria for the grant?
Yes, she said, I think that you answered that in the previous comment.
Okay. Yeah, because we are looking for how we do look at, so to piggyback on it, we do look at what are the resources you have to get the grant done. So in other words, how are you going to do this? and what's it going to take, and is what's it going to take part of the grant request, or do you already have something in place that will be able to accomplish this request without? I mean, we've seen it both ways. So.
Yeah. Another one, can we submit the same grant application for both the pooled fund grants and the AB grants?
Sorry, no. I hate to go into this because it's very complicated, but what you can do is if there are two different grants, completely different requests that you have, you can submit one for the AB grant and one in the pooled fund grants process, but they have to be completely different. Having said that, we can tell you that along the way, you won't get both. So at the end of the process, and we're going to go through what the various steps are, what our organization has said is we won't give a $60,000 grant and a $30,000 grant to the same organization in one grant session. Again, because of our desire to broadly fund lots of different organizations in the community over the course of time. But if you believe in statistics and you think if you have two different ones and you apply in both areas, statistically, you could say you have a better chance. But it would also be quite a bit of work. So,
can I add something there?
Yeah, please do. This is Amy.
I will just say that this is not unique to the AB grant, that in fact, if you have two different interest areas that you would like to apply for a $20,000 to $30,000 grant, it works the same way. You can do multiple applications in different interest areas as long as they are completely different projects, and knowing that you can only win in one per year.
A couple other questions. Applications from an organization currently being funded. We receive grant funds for healthcare, and our grant request would support the patients we provide healthcare to. Would we qualify?
Can you read that again?
Yeah.
Are they currently being funded by IWCF? Because there is a 3-year wait period.
Okay.
Usually, well,
Well,
depends how many years you've asked for your grant to last.
Exactly.
Maybe Kylie, can you clarify on that question? Oh, so we are not HRSA funded.
So not us.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is, let me make sure, you are getting funding for
Healthcare.
for a grant, and you want to get additional funding from us for that grant. That's possible, but again, we look at the whole picture of what the grant is, but we know that if we aren't funding the whole thing, you're getting funding from somebody else anyway. And so in most cases from these grants, even the $30,000 ones, a lot of times the grant may be the need may be for 50 and you're getting 20 from somebody else and 30 from us. So, the same could be with 50. If the need is $100,000 and you get 50 of that $100,000 from us and 50 from somebody else, good for you, So I hope that gives clarity to Kylie.
Yeah, she did say, no, we would request grant monies for new service needed from you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Another question, to revisit a few earlier slides, the pooled fund grants annually, IWCF likes to be the leader funder on the projects, but with the AB grant, IWCF is happy to be a part of a group funding for a larger project.
Yes, thank you. That's a great way to say it.
And then how many applicants apply for the AB grants?
We've only done one in the past, and it was our first one, and I think we had only 15 or 16 applications for that.
It was much narrower.
It was a much narrower grant, AB grant, and this year we did a different kind of process to select the targeted area, and we've done a whole different kind of marketing campaign. So I'm not going to predict because I don't want to jinx anything one way or another, but I think we will have more interest in this one based on the targeted demographic and the amount of communication we've put out about it. And I just want to say something about the grants selection process, because it's the sort of how many apply is an important thing. First of all, we get many well-qualified, wonderful grants, And if we had 1,000 members or 1,200 members, we could just give more and more and more grants, okay? So our giving is limited by our membership and the numbers of people that we have. But we do have to, in these grants meetings, is to compare one against the other. And so it does matter from year to year who applies in the same category as you. We have had numerous times, and so I'm saying this kind of out loud now, we have had numerous times where people have applied for a grant. It's been a well-qualified grant. It's gone to the ballot, or maybe it's not even made it to the ballot because only 2 per category can go to the ballot. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And they don't win. And I would say to you, the majority of people who have done a really good job on a grant, who have gotten really, really close, should always come back, because we have many examples of people who have not won the first time or maybe even the second time, but have won in future years. Because again, some of this is visibility, some of this is who applied in the year in which you applied, and the competition may be different from year to year. So we always encourage people not to be daunted by the numbers, but to sort of believe in what you do and just keep trying, and you get better also at applying to the criteria. You know, you could have a really great need and it might not fit our criteria, and women would say, we'd love to see that funded, but it doesn't fit what we do. So part of the reason for today's session, and I've said this once, but I'm going to say it again, is to make sure you fully understand what we're looking for, because the better you get at writing a grant application that addresses what we're looking for, the better chance you have.
And then kind of going off of that, do you give any feedback on unsuccessful applications?
If the person asks, we do. We do not proactively go out and say, hey, let us tell you. But if somebody wants to sit down with the grants chair, which would be Amy this year, she's happy to sit down with you after the process and give you feedback on what you could have done differently or better.
It's surprising how few people come and ask, but I am happy to do it, absolutely.
And then can the AB grant be spread over 2 years?
Yes.
That's all I got.
Okay, so let me just talk a little bit about the process, which is the next slide that's up. We start with a full proposal, and so our application is robust at the very beginning. Let me just say, we've gone backwards and forwards about in previous years. This past year was the first year that we did not have a letter of interest as opposed to a full proposal. This comes from the need for us to have lots of information because of the number of applications we get. And actually, some of it is we don't have the resources to have a grants process that lasts 9 months or 12 months. We used to do that. We got feedback from nonprofits that was too long, so we have shortened our process. And one of the ways of shortening the process is to start with a very robust full proposal. That full proposal for this year's grants process is due December 11th at noon. Let me also say, okay, do not apply at 12:03. Okay, okay, you will not be considered. So when we say December 11th at noon we cut it off. And not this past year, but the year before, we had somebody that got it in late and said, can't you please? And we said, you know, because this is why we come out and do these kinds of things, to say we are very structured on a lot of these things. But again, structure is not bad as long as you know what the structure is. We look at the full proposals, we evaluate them over the course of December and January, and then the committee that's looking at the proposals. So again, there's a committee for above and beyond, there's a committee for cultural arts, a committee for environment, a committee for education, a committee for financial stability, and a committee for health. Those committees make a decision within the committee about those applications or organization with whom we want to have a site visit. And the site visits are announced, we hold the site visits in mid-February, and we usually make our decisions in late January about what they're going to be. If you're going to be, the site visit is a critical piece. It's usually 3 to 5 organizations per category have site visits. And we come out with a group of women and we ask questions about things that maybe we need clarity on the application. Again, we give you a lot more information if you're selected for site visit about what we're looking for. From the site visit, we choose 2 organizations to go to ballot, and 2 organizations in each category, I should say. 2 for above and beyond, 2 for each one of the 5 interest areas. The ballot goes out in early April, and in mid-April, we get voting back. We have 2 weeks, usually 2 to 2.5 weeks, that the membership has to vote on who gets the grant. And then in mid-April, you find out who the winner is. And the winners are then acknowledged and recognized, and the first checks are given at our annual meeting in May. So the process, which used to be very lengthy, is now down to about 4 months. And again, part of that is the rigorousness of the amount of rigor in the process, but also the amount of time and effort we put into really looking and understanding and getting to know your organization and the nature of your grant request, which is very important to us from an education perspective. So let me stop there and say, I'm going to move on to the handout. And again, just a few minutes, what other questions do you have? Or does anybody else in the room want to say something about what we've addressed so far? All good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me just move on to the handout. And again, not up on the slides, but hopefully you can see it as part of the process. The handout really was designed for a lot of our in-person sessions, because people come and many times they don't RSVP, so they didn't get a copy of the slides, and the slides don't have as much detail as the handout does. So it's just another piece of education information that we're providing to you. It does review some of the things that were on the slides. Part of the really important part is probably the definition of the 5 interest areas: cultural arts, education, environment, financial stability, and health. A reason for that, again, is the organization gets to choose where they want to apply. And we could say to you that many aspects of some of the programs that we get have an education component. Education is generally where we get the largest number of applications. So it's a little bit more competitive in education than it is in other areas. But again, you get to choose, and we do not change what you choose. So even if we look at it and say, oh gosh, this would have been a better environment application instead of education, we honor your choice, and we evaluate against those other in that category. It also addresses the above and beyond grant. And again, most of this is stuff that we've already talked about. It gives you the overall criteria, again, the do not funds, and then it gives you a little bit more detail about the process and deadlines. The detail that's added on the handout that isn't on the slides is when you'll be notified about each step along the way. And then we have a little bit more specificity about the date for the recognition and those kinds of things. And then the other really important piece is the website and where to apply. What is really important for you to recognize is there are 2 different applications this year. One for the AB grant, only the AB grant, and the other for any application that comes within the 5 interest areas. So make sure, there are some variances, but not a lot, but there are some differences. Make sure you select the right application for the grant request that you're really seeking. And when you go out there, it's pretty clear, click here or click here. All of our stuff is done online. So you fill out the application online. Please, please, please read the instructions for the application, because if you fill out a portion of it and you leave it sit there, it's only there for a certain amount of time and it disappears. And so before you sort of get to going in and started working on it, please do some planning in terms of how much time it's going to take you, and do you really have all the information you need to fill out the application? And that's all covered in the instructions. So there are also attachments on the application. And again, we have had people who've forgotten to attach the attachments, or some systems that you may have, if you have to redo something or resend it a second time, the attachments fall off. You know, just please make sure that you kind of know all those things and that you're very careful about how you submit, because we just hate to see something that's a really good grant request come without the right attachments and be eliminated. So anyhow, more questions?
Yes, we do have one. If someone joins IWCF this year, are they allowed to participate in writing a grant for an organization, or is that considered a conflict of interest?
Yes, they are allowed. They cannot, however, sit on the grant committee of the interest area, or if it's the AB grant where their grant is being evaluated. And we have had situations where that's been the case. And many times, if we're in our larger education meetings and we get to the point where we're talking about the pluses and minuses of an individual. So when we do the site visit and we vote as a grants committee about what's going to go on the ballot, we have very open dialogue about the pluses and minuses of each of the grant applications. And if there is somebody who has written one of those grants, we do ask them to recuse themselves from that discussion and that dialogue, because we don't want to inhibit people's ability to be able to talk about stuff. We also have a conflict of interest statement that each person fills out, and we are asked to report our conflict of interest. So if we're on the board of another organization that may be applying, if we've been a volunteer at another organization, if our spouse is on the board of another organization. And when I was the grants chair, I was on the board, and I didn't even know what the grant request was that was submitted. I communicated to the organization who was applying, don't talk to me about this. I can't have any discussion with you about it. And I never was in any dialogue or discussion. And so we ask people to do that, even if they aren't writing the grant, if they have some affiliation or some connection to one of the organizations that's applying. That's part of that sort of integrity and piece that is very important to us, that our process remain pure and evaluated by independent thinkers. So.
Would you like to touch on assessments a little bit? What happens if you do receive a grant?
Sure. First of all, we have once a person is awarded the grant, actually before the annual meeting, when you are recognized, we assign a person from grants assessment to work with you as a liaison on making sure and working with you on any issues or challenges you might have in getting your grant completed. And that person meets with the organization regularly to get updates on how the progress is being made. That person will come back to a group called the Grant Steering Committee, which is a bit of an advisory group to the whole grants process. If there are any issues with the grant, if there are things that the organization wants to change one way or another about what the request was for. So example, we get into doing something that, so I'm going to use an example that we've had in the past. It's a brick and mortar process. And we find out that the place we were going to build the wall, now we can't build the wall there because of some construction zone requirements or something. So we're not going to build the wall now. Okay, but we can do X, Y, and Z, which is a substitute for the money for the wall. And those kinds of things we want requested in writing from the organization. And then the grant steering committee will say okay or nay, or yes, that's fine to change. We certainly don't want to encourage people to submit things that they don't think they can commit to. I would say 99% of our grants are successfully completed the way we want them to be, but we have had situations where we've had to not give the full grant because the organization has not done any part of what they said they were going to do. And we've also had one situation in 17 years, which isn't very much, where we've had to take money back because they didn't do what they say they were going to do, which is why in the criteria we say we want very planfully executed programs and processes and services and requests. We want you to think a lot about what you're doing. We actually had an organization where They applied for a grant and they were in the middle of the process, and we loved their grant request, and their board had not approved the fact that they were going to do this, and the board said, we can't do this, and they ended up having to pull out. So again, that's an internal thing within your particular organizations, but there's been a lot of things over the course of time and history that have come up that we'd like to share with you, just because it's part of the due diligence of writing a good grant request. We hate to lose a really good request, because on the other end, the due diligence hasn't been done to get the board of directors to approve or to review, and maybe your board doesn't care, and that's fine too. But again, there's some weird things that have come up over the course of time that we'd like to say, be thinking about this anyway.
Do you want to use those?
Oh, I could. Yeah. We have, so Amy, since we have a little bit of time, Amy pulled up something that we had done in education this year, which is myths. So first of all, I didn't ask at the beginning, and I was supposed to, how many of you have applied for a grant with us before? If you could wave your hands. So Evan knows how many out there have done this previously.
Okay, now go ahead and put your hands up. Okay. Good chunk coming through. So it looks like maybe a third of the people joining us online.
Okay, well, good. Well, then this next part is really meaningful. So as an organization that's been around for 17 years doing this grant making that we do, personally, I've heard a lot of things in these education sessions. Well, I've heard that this, or I've heard that you don't do this. And so 2 years ago, we created a list of myths and things that we've heard about our organization that actually aren't true. And so Amy pulled those out from one of the slide decks, and I think it's a really good thing for us to talk about. The first one is an organization has to apply more than once to receive a grant from IWCF. So the myth was, oh, you'll never get it on your first shot. Well, in 2016, 3 of our 5 members in the pooled fund grants process had applied for just the first time. And I don't know the number from last year, but it's at least 1 or 2 that had never applied before that got a grant from us. So again, that's a myth. We only give grants that focus on children. Somebody stood up in a meeting and said, so if we have a grant that focuses on X or Y, will it even be considered? Because I understand you only do children. That's not true. And as you can look at the AB grant, we're asking for specifically for a grant this year that might address seniors. We have addressed, actually I did the statistics, and it was only 30% of the grants that we had awarded in our whole history of doing grants that were children focused. We service entire communities. We've serviced the military. We've serviced seniors before. We've serviced women. We've serviced, everybody. So we want to fund holistically the community. Next one is an organization only ever gets 1 grant from IWCF. Also not true. We've had actually, I don't know if this number is still good, but I think it's between 9 and 11 organizations that have gotten multiple grants, one that actually got 3 or 4. So again, over the course of 17 years, we want to fund a diverse group of organizations, but we also want to fund the best grant in each category every year. So there you go. Another myth, we don't fund salaries. That's already been asked today. And again, there's a difference for us between a salary that's part of general operations and ongoing operations and a salary that's necessary in some way, shape, or form to the completion of the grant request. And I think that was it for the myths. But if you've heard any of those and you want to ask that as a question, please don't be afraid to, because we'd much rather clarify that in this discussion than to have people walking away thinking these things are true when in fact they are not accurate. Anything else? Any other questions? Last chance. Okay, so I want to thank all of you so much for being here today. I hope this was worth your time. And I hope you got some information that will be helpful to you if, in fact, you decide to apply for a grant with us, or maybe even if you want to apply for a grant with someone else. I think what we've all learned around this is that the important thing is to look at whatever organization is that you're applying with and find out what their criteria are, because it really differs greatly from organization to organization. And maybe they don't have a do not fund list, we do. You know, so all of these things are really important as you think about this. We do have a number of other sessions over the next couple of months. So also look on our website if you decide you want to come in person. We get a lot of, I'm going to say this to you since I've done the education sessions for the last 3 or 4 years. We get a lot more questions in person when people are there. People raise their hand, they want to talk about specific examples. It's a little bit harder, I understand, in terms of writing, but if you want to come to another session, you're more than welcome. We often have people come more than once. They look at the application, they have some questions about that. They think, well, maybe I'll go to another session. And in all of our sessions, whether they're AB oriented or not, we have 2 coming up, one in environment and one in financial stability. The reason we do those in sessions is many times groups come together and they find collaborations within their category, or people, they hear this group is going to do a grant and they were thinking the same idea and they get to talk and collaborate. But anybody's really welcome to all of the sessions. And we'd love to meet you in person if you've been on the webinar today. But again, thank you so much for your time. We so appreciate you being here. And we hope to see your application in December. So thanks.